Bonjour, habari za leo. My name is Jakudu Guya.
My name is Jahan Biku.
My name is Rashik Fatah. I'm the director of Our Future Cities. On behalf of ICLI Africa, the African Centre for Cities, Our Future Cities, and partners, I'm excited to welcome all of you to the Rise Africa 2021 Action Festival.
Rise Africa has been growing as a platform of thinkers, doers, and enablers committed to inspiring action for sustainable cities.
Rise Africa is about building active networks across academia, government, private sector, civil society, and the arts.
Our entry point is based not on articulating problems, followed by proposing solutions, but rather on celebrating our cities as places of innovation and culture, while asking what more we can do to make them more sustainable, inclusive, and vibrant.
This festival is hosting 46 sessions from across 16 countries in Africa and the world. Every session aims to share new ideas, showcase ongoing actions, and launch new initiatives by bringing participants together to chart a new route forward.
We hope that the festival program will inspire you to commit to one or more specific actions that you or your organization will take on. As the session closes, you'll be redirected to a survey in which you can articulate these actions. We will follow up on these committed actions throughout the year and offer resources, connections, and support. In this way, we are testing the idea that events can galvanize action, and we hope that you will join us in this effort.
Beyond this session, there are many ways to take part in the festival.
Register for further sessions.
Vote for your favorites in the photo competition.
Watch a variety of inspiring video provocations.
Test your knowledge of African cities from our daily quiz.
And listen and dance to the Rise Africa 2021 playlist.
We hope that you will make all attempts to reach out to new people and build lasting connections.
Before we begin, it is important to note that this session is being recorded and that by participating, you are consenting to be recorded. All recordings will be available on the program page after the festival.
Creative expression is vital for creating new futures for our cities. So we invite you to enter the session in the spirit of creativity and dreaming.
Let our voices ring, soft and strong. A million rainbow tongues pushing our songs through the wind. Let our stories dance out in step with the moon. Let them boom from hamlets in Soweto. Rise through the sprawls of Cairo, straddle the contradictions of Lagos. Let them tell of sweat and fear. Accompanied by djembes, talking drums, and all that jazz. And time and again, it is to these voices we turn to remind us that we get past the pain, that we have once chiseled out beauty from mountains of self-doubt, and through the dark tunnels of despair, these stories will lead us out. A universe of multiple dreams written into history, written out of poverty, written to the laughter of thunder, written in lightning, written by a million rainbow voices that never stop ringing.
Welcome to our panel, Driving Electrification in Africa. My name is Ahmed. I am Solution Manager and Business Development Lead at Transport for Cairo. Transport for Cairo is hosting this session, which I supported to organize with Rise Africa. I'd like to thank first Rise Africa and ICLI for putting this great program together. And I'd like to thank our attendees who chose to join our discussion. We know that there are very interesting topics running concurrently on the program. I see more people joining us at the moment as we speak, but I think we're ready to start. The panel will run for 90 minutes. And it will be moderated by Mohammed Higazi. So if I may introduce Higazi, he is an economist and he is our director at Transport for Cairo, director and co-founder of Transport for Cairo. I will be with you in the chat box. Feel free to send me any questions you may have. And Mohammed Higazi, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Ahmed. Well, thank you very much, Rise Africa, for organizing this amazing festival today. I'm really glad that we are all together in this webinar, and I'm really honored to be in the presence of the amazing panelists that we have with us today. Today, we will be discussing a really important topic. How do we electrify public transport in Africa? The science is clear. The target is specific. We need to decarbonize transportation fully, and we seem to have around time for around the middle of the century to do it. We want to explore the opportunities for public-private partnerships to help us achieve that. And today we have multiple stakeholders representing the science, the engineering, the public projects and private companies that will help us shed a light on this important topic, exchange ideas, and learn from one another. Please allow me to introduce to you our four panelists. We will start today with Mr. Thomas Gericke, who is Head of Mobility at Siemens. Mr. Thomas has more than 11 years of experience in e-mobility. He works to support governments and public sector organizations to introduce charging infrastructures and to build the necessary base for the transition to take place. He has previous experience with the European Commission, and he worked a lot on research projects in Germany. Today, he will tell us about the best of the field and what is really happening, because we're at the forefront of an electric revolution, basically. Before I continue introducing the rest of the speakers, we will move to a quick poll. I leave it to you, Ahmed, to explain the mechanics.
It is simple. We'd like you all to think about when the first electric vehicle was ever made. All right, so this is just our segue into Thomas' presentation. So we'll keep receiving your answers. And in the meantime, we can go ahead and listen to Thomas from Siemens.
Yeah, thank you very much for your introduction. Here's Thomas Gericke from Siemens. I'm very proud to present our experience and my experience from the last 11 years. And I like cars, but I think now we are really going to a new area, and I call this area electrification of the transport sector, electrification of the mobility sector. And I will share my screen. So hopefully you will see my screen now. No, I think it will be fine. You see my screen? It's fine?
Yes, we can see your screen, Thomas. Please proceed.
Perfect. So, and I think I'm working in the field of e-mobility since several years. And when I've done my presentation, and I'm starting for 10 years, and the people ask Thomas, you know, electrical cars, look only on the streets. And what do you see on the streets and in the parking areas? And I think also if you're looking now on the streets in the cities, you see normal cars, normal combustion engines. And I think we as human beings, we have always the difficulty to predict the future or see some changes, what's happening right now on the market. And I have a look back into the past, and also if you go 100 years back to New York, because what you see on the screen on this side is only there were no car on the street in the Fifth Avenue, New York. There was only horses. But what happens then? 10 years later or 13 years, there was only cars on the street in New York on the Fifth Avenue. And exactly this happened right now. So if I'm looking now on the streets, I'm right now located here in Germany, in the south part in Munich, and I'm seeing more and more electric cars, and I'm doing the research about the new cars in Europe, for example. Right now, we have 16% of all new cars in Europe are already electrified. And when I'm doing the forecast for my clients, what happens in the next 5, 10, 15 years, I'm convinced in 10 years, the most of the new cars will be electric globally. So the change happened really now, right now it will happen. And I'm not talking about cars, I'm talking about the complete transport and mobility sector. So I'm talking about cars in the private sector, but I'm talking also about e-buses in the public sector. I'm talking about fleets about heavy trucks will be electrified, but for sure also airplanes, I'm talking also about boats and trains for sure, is already electrified. So we are in an amazing time right now. And what is a part of Siemens? So I'm working for Siemens since several years, and I'm responsible for support our customers in the ramp up to support the e-mobility. And for sure, Siemens is not a car manufacturer, but I think in the past there was two different areas. There was the car industry, and on the other hand, there was the petrol industries. A lot of power they have, but I think in the future the game is still open, because on the one part, and I will show it also on the e-mobility value chain, we need energy, we need electricity, and hopefully electricity only from renewable energy sources, from PV or also from wind farms. The problem with this renewable energies, we have a very high volatility. And on the other hand, we have also a lot of new IT components, we have the building technology, we're talking about efficiency. And in my opinion, the e-mobility part is only one part in the complete picture. It's like a puzzle bit in this picture. And what is our goal from Siemens? Really to support this transformation in this new time, in this electrification of the mobility sector. So our goal is really to support the necessary energy with renewable energy on the complete value chain. That means energy production, energy transmission, distribution, and to the microgrid. And I will start a little bit about what happened right now in this market, and I call this push-pull mechanism. So on the one hand, we have this push. The push is, for example, globally, we need to really reduce our CO2 emission. So from the European Commission, we have the goal minus 55%. In Germany, now for 2 weeks ago, they mentioned we will go much faster until 2030 with 65%. And I think it's really necessary to reduce our emission, because the global warming, it's fundamental. We need to reduce this. And we're seeing also now the different governments, the European Commission, the countries, the Nordic countries, for example, starting now to forbid combustion engine from 2025 up to 2040, Japan, US. A lot of countries will follow to really to not allow cars to go into the cities. One of the big drivers is also, I have to say, China, because China, they have problems. They have no access to petrol, but they have access to lithium, for example, and they will be one of the forerunner in the e-mobility branches. In China, we have already more than 100 car manufacturers that produce electrical cars. The cities will close. The cities will be closed for combustion engines, like in Paris, like in Stockholm, Copenhagen. So you can't go with the combustion engines in the future in the city. And now, since last year, we have also new US government, and they are supporting also the environmental program. This is on the one part, the push mechanism. And then we get the reaction from the industry. And I'm coming, I have to say, from the north part of Germany, where Volkswagen is the biggest car manufacturers. And a lot of time they need to transform, because they earn money with the old cars I mentioned here, but they need to transform. And now they're investing a huge research, only Volkswagen 75 billion in the car manufacturers really to focus on this. And I mentioned more than 100 car manufacturers, and already now they announced the last big card for conventional car industries are already submitted. So by 2025, for example, Volvo and Jaguar, Rover, they will decide, no, we will not produce combustion engine. Also Daimler-Benz, BMW, General Motors, Toyota, they will go to produce electrical cars. And what we are seeing right now is that we have an increasing demand from the end user point of view. So we have right now, I mentioned already 60% share in the European Commission. If I go to Norway and in Netherlands, we have more than in Norway, more than 50% new electrical vehicles. Then we will see also new charging technology, because people ask always, Thomas, what is the time to charge a car? And we will charge cars up to 350 kilowatt hours, but in the end, it doesn't matter only the speed, because always if you park a car in the future, if you go to your office area, if you're staying at the shopping mall, or at home, you can charge your car. You will see new technologies like vehicle to X, that means vehicle to grid, that we can use also the battery of the cars to stabilize the grid constraints. Inductive charging, we will see And then from the market player point of view, in the beginning, we have seen a lot of power utilities investing in charging infrastructure, but now we are seeing also the petrol industry will investing here, the IT companies. So it's really a new big market, and the companies will invest here. Another driver is also in the car manufacturers really to reduce the CO2 profile, the CO2 emission, because there's a penalty in Europe for each gram they have in the fleet here. So there are a lot of drivers, and this is the impact now globally. We are seeing that I'm absolutely convinced that the new form of mobility is electric. And when I'm talking to my customers globally, my experience, we have 3 different phases of the introduction of e-mobility in all countries, in all companies. It starts always with, I call this phase, the first phase is enabling. That means they install 10, 20, 50 charging stations. They have an own charging app. You have RFID cards. And I call this, it's an isolated applications. The problem is that from the EV driver point of view, it doesn't matter to whom the owner is of the charging station, because if you're EV driver, you only would like to charge, you would like to have access to these charging stations. And we mentioned already that I work for the European Commission. In Europe, we have a lot of different countries, and we have only in Germany a lot of power utilities, and they all install this isolated application. And that's the issue, because then you have maybe 10, 20, 30 RFID cards. So the next step is then in the second phase, really to go into this roaming mobility platforms. It's this different solutions really connected. And one of my recommendations is always to have also some guidelines, some frames, some recommendations, standardization for the charging infrastructure. And I compared always why we couldn't talk now, because the internet is working and the internet is based on IP addresses, and exactly for the e-mobility business, we need also standards. The next part is also in the second phase, cost reduction, because if you have 10, 15 charging stations, it's fine. But if you install several thousand charging stations, it costs a lot of money. For example, in Google, in the headquarters from Google, we have right now more than 3,000 charging stations installed. And you can also imagine what is the energy consumption. So we're going into the energy trading, integration, mobility platforms, and this is second phase. This is third phase. We are seeing right now, they will come, it's new business models and new business model. I'm seeing, especially in Europe, in this forerunner countries like, I have to say, Netherlands, Norway, for example, they're always a step ahead. So they come always with ideas that they can, for example, integrate cars into the grid. I call it a vehicle to X, a vehicle to grid, that you will see new charging services, a new possibility. And I'm still convinced also, and I compared often with the mobile phone industry. If you go 20 years back, you have only used your mobile phone to calling and writing SMS. And nowadays you're using your mobile phone 90% for a different purpose, and it's a flat rate. And imagine only in the car you're driving today, it's only you're driving the car from A to B. And in the future, I'm convinced you will use your car in different manner, because it's in the end a big energy storage or mobile energy storage with a lot of IT infrastructure. So it's these 3 elements. It's always important to know here. And if you're going about this complete e-mobility value chain, often the people say, okay, it's only a hardware, but in the end, if you're seeing the entire value chain, e-mobility value chain, it's always you need energy, you need power supplier, you need energy transmission, distribution, I call this the energy production line. Then we have the car manufacturer, including the battery supplier we need here. Then we have the electric vehicle supply equipment, the EVSE technology with charging station hardware. Then it's very important to mention you need always a software application, because this charging station are connected to a backend system that you can use it also, for example, with an charging app. And then on the right side, you see the technical issues. And one important issue is we call this CPO, it's called charge point operator. These companies are responsible to install and to operate from the technical point of view the charging stations. Because I think one key element is for successful e-mobility roadmaps that the charging stations are available, that they're running, and all these charging stations have a connection to the backend system. If it doesn't work, you can't charge your car, and it's the big issue is you come to this electric vehicle and you have only 10 kilometers and you can't charge. So I think this technical operation is a very important issue in my mind, and there will companies go in, and it's called a charge point operator. And then on the right side, I call it as a mobility or e-mobility service provider. All the transactions to the EV driver, you need to register, you have a charging app, you have reporting, the invoicing, navigation. All this functionality belongs to the e-mobility service provider and also the business-to-business and business-to-consumer contact here. And what is important when I'm doing my job to my customers is to identify what is the part from this company and which partners or which companies could be supporting this overall value chain. The next part, I will go a little bit on the e-bus and the public part. And what I'm seeing so far is that globally, all big cities convert right now to e-buses. For example, in Germany, we have the big city like Berlin. In Berlin, we have more than 3,600 conventional buses, and now in the next 5 years, they will be converted to electrical buses. And when we're going to electrical buses, we need also to consider the energy supply and the different strategies, how we can charge buses. You could do it during the nighttime. We call it depot charging. We can do it based on we call it opportunity charging, for example, in each bus stop, or we could do it also with pantographen solutions. And also what we are seeing here is the same as also for the e-car business, that the breakthrough from the break even comes through the reducing prices for the batteries. The development of the prices are really decreasing right now. And on the other hand, I think it's important to change the public transport to electrical, because I think we have a very high environmental impact here, not only CO2. I think what is also really important to mention is the PM2 emission, and also NOx emission in the cities is very huge. So also the health from the people in the cities have a big negative impact. So that's also one of the drivers that we really need to support and transform to the public e-buses here, public transport electrify this. And also in the next slide, you see the forecast here. It's only from the European bus market here, what will happen here right now. And I think this trend globally in all countries, we are really going to this electrification of the public transport here. Another part I will go in only short, because it's always asked, okay, Thomas, where all the cars will be charged in the future, and what is important to mention here, when you charge your car, 80% of the cars will be charged at home, at least in Europe, or at office areas. Then you can also charge your cars on highways, on traffic mobility side, in shopping malls, public areas, EV sharing, but all these different charging services I call need to be considered. And they're different between charging time, because if you're charging at your office area or home, you have often 8 to 10 hours. But if you're on a highway, you have only a short time. And also the business model is different, because if you go to a shopping mall or to a restaurant, they would like to attract you as driver. So they often these charging services for free. So different charging services. And one project I would also like to mention here to the end of my presentation is we have done a very successful project in Africa, Rwanda, together with Volkswagen. It was a e-mobility car sharing project we have done last year. And I think this is also important. I don't mention we have different trends right now. And one part is really, do we need our own car or do we need more sharing cars? And this is, I think, also globally, this sharing market. So we don't need own cars, can also use sharing cars, and we have done a very successful project here in Africa and Rwanda last year. Yes, and the question was already in the beginning, when the first electrical car, at least from Siemens' point of view, it's called Victoria. It was one of the first electrical cars. It was already 1882 from Werner von Siemens. It's still alive in Berlin. And I need also to mention the first car, which was faster than 100 kilometers per hour. It was from a French person, La Jamais Condé. And I think on the right side, I'm now working 10 years in this e-mobility business, but I'm still convinced we are first in the beginning of this new time. And it's very difficult now to predict the future. And look only on the right side. You know, if you have asked at this time how should a telephone look with a camera included? You maybe have drawn this picture with a telephone and camera, and if you're looking now on your smartphone, it's complete difference. So I'm convinced we are right now in a very amazing time. We will see a lot of changes in the future, and yes, we would like to support you on this journey, on this e-mobility journey, to see that really this transition will be successful in your country. So for this, I will say thank you for you. And if you have some more questions, you can also contact me directly by mobile or by my email address. So thank you very much for your time. If there's some question, you can also ask me later on.
Thank you very much for this amazing presentation, Thomas. To our audience, I would like to remind you that feel free to ask your questions in the chat. We are monitoring as it happens, and I will try to bring all of the questions to the floor. Thomas, I really enjoyed your presentation, and for me, I think the core thing that caught my attention is this comparison with the internet and with the IP standards and the mobile phone industry, especially because there's always this narrative about Africa leapfrogging fixed telephony networks in favor of the mobile phones and wireless ones. Do you see a similar leapfrog as being technically possible in the e-mobility space?
Yeah, very good question. Yes, I think it could be happening at the same stage, because I think also that you can go directly to the e-mobility business, and I think that's also the reason why it takes this comparison with the mobile phone industry, because we will see new driver behavior, and this will have a big impact on the complete society, and I think will have a big impact on the environmental impact. But I think to do this, or in order to support this, we need some standards and some guidelines and regulation, and that's important to support also in Africa, to really to see which experience we have done, for example, in Europe, and adapt this experience to the local conditions, I think. But I think this comparison with the mobile phone industry could be happening also the same way in the e-mobility field. Exactly.
Fantastic. Well, I see that we have our first question from the audience, coming from Mrs. Alda Metras from the World Bank Group and the IFC. She's interested to know if Siemens and Volkswagen are interested to replicate the Kigali model in other markets in Sub-Saharan Africa or the MENA region. Perhaps you can also shed light on the size of the initial investment and what the pipeline for the future looks like from that learning experience, Thomas?
Yes, I think really it's one of our first product with the e-mobility, and also with the car manufacturer Volkswagen, and for sure we are interested to use this as I call it blueprint or pilot, to use our experience here from the Kigali project, very successful in Rwanda, also for other countries in Africa, for sure. Yes, we would like to support you.
Well, so it remains to be seen. Well, fantastic. Thomas, ich danke dir. Thank you very much for this amazing presentation. I think it's time that we move the floor to... I see that there are more questions coming in.
Great.
Well, maybe I'll take another question before moving to the next presentation. And the questions that we don't handle directly now, we will get back to in the open discussion phase. But I think that there's interest to learn about more insights in how countries with weaker power grids, such as South Africa, can support electric vehicle adoption and the difference to more developed markets. Perhaps you can comment on that, Thomas?
Yes, I think one very important part is always the energy supply issue. And one of my favorite slides I have not presented yet is always the three different elements. If you're talking about energy supply, one is the physical layer, I call it copper, because you can for sure install grid connections, you can install battery storage, you can install PV. But the other part is always to also, from the concept point of view, to see what is the demand of the electric vehicles, what is the power demand, and what is the charging time, because you don't need, I mentioned it's possible from the technical point of view to install 350 kV charger, but if you have time, 10 hours time to charge a car, and it's only, you drove, I don't know, 40 kilometers, it's enough for 3.7 kilowatt hours. So consider also from the concept part of view how much energy you need. And the third part is always, I call it the smart part, because all these charging stations are connected to the backend system. So you have a smart charging concept to see, okay, you will consider what is the available energy on the grid point, but then you can also consider what is the overall energy availability in this grid area, to maybe you need to reduce or to increase the energy power. And this we're calling smart charging solutions based on an IT backend system. And all the three elements from the physical layers, so introduce for sure renewable energy sources, local energy sources on the charging station, for example, rooftop mounted PV installation, but also to use storage solutions, including with the concept and including also from the IT backend from smart charging solutions. I think this supporting also the grid issues here. And for sure, I know the situation a little bit about Africa, so from the grid point of view, it will be challenging. I think that's the reason why we need all areas to consider here in this concept.
Fantastic.
Answer.
Absolutely. I can hear inside your answer the importance and the need to look at an integrated point of view, to look at the big picture, to look at interactions of the different components of the grid with the end users of the vehicles. Moving on. Thank you very much, Thomas.
Thank you.
Now we present our next panelist. I am honored to be able to present to you Mr. Herman Koba, who is the Transport and Climate Change Project Officer at the GIZ. He is currently working on the Advancing Transport Climate Strategies project. It's called TRACS, T-R-A-C-S, in Nairobi, Kenya. And I've actually had the luck to come across this project in my academic research before even getting to meet Herman for this panel. And I'm really looking forward to hear from you more about the state of research right now. Herman, the floor is all yours. And I see that we have a second poll that got started. This one is about the contribution of global greenhouse gas emissions that come from road transportation. While we fill the poll, Herman, you may proceed.
Thank you very much. Just loading my PowerPoint. Let me know if you can see it before I proceed.
Yes, we can see it.
Okay, perfect then. So my name is Herman Koba. I am, as you mentioned, working on a project called Advancing Transport and Climate Strategies. It's in a few countries. It's a global project, but I manage the Kenyan component. But before I dig deeper into my presentation, I also wanted to mention that we've been cooperating with Siemens Stiftung, the foundation particularly, on a project in rural Kenya, trying to see how the uptake of electric mobility and the perception on electric elements, mobility and different components is perceived in rural Western Kenya. And I know OPBUS is also partly involved in that, and I can see Siemens as well in that. So I will, however, not present outputs of that research in this phase, but all of it is online. We can discuss further the outputs for that. Yeah, so as I mentioned, I work for a TRACS project. We've been in Kenya since 2017, closely cooperating with the State Department of Transport in Kenya. And our focus has largely been supporting the government of Kenya, particularly the transport sector, meet its nationally determined contribution target of the NDC. So we've been doing a lot of mitigation, potential and assessments, trying to see what sort of contribution the country can make in as far as its commitments that have been put forward. So what I thought, before I dig deeper into the issues that we're discussing today, I would like to present a profile of the transport sector in Kenya. So we currently have about 3.6 million vehicles, and this is the number of vehicles that have been registered, not the total in-use vehicles. So we don't deregister vehicles in Kenya at the moment. So I think a lot of African states are in this circumstance as well. So you don't have a clear picture of how many vehicles are actually on the road. You just have an idea of how many vehicles you've registered as a country. And we did an estimate with the University of Nairobi using survival rates. assessments, and we came to about 70% of vehicles that have been registered ever since are still on the road in the country. Something interesting is that also the rate of increase of vehicles, motorcycles have overtaken typical motor vehicles. And now motor vehicles are registering at about 100,000 a year, while motorcycles at about 170,000. And we have a motorization rate of about 24 passenger cars per 1,000 people. So of great interest as well, something I really wanted to highlight as well is the fact that you can see there was exponential growth of vehicles, not electric vehicles, pardon, of vehicles, particularly motorcycles, sometimes around 2008 there. The blue color code represents the motorcycle spike in the country. And this leads me to make a point that, and the main reason for this, let me get back to that first, is that incentives drove this exponential growth. And this leads me to that conclusion that incentives have proven to work in the country. And the main interest here was because electric motorcycle, I keep confusing, motorcycles, broadly speaking, are a source of employment in the country. They operate as public transport, so a lot of youth have access to them, and then they can also support movement of people, short distance, longer distance, depending on interest. So in the rural areas and in urban areas, the use of motorcycles is very different. And so the point here that I wanted to clearly make is that incentives have proven to work in the country in the past, and we're hoping to see this also translate into the electric mobility space, and also try to see if this can also spike a transition into cleaner fuels, particularly with interest around air quality as well as the country meeting its climate change target. Now, I also thought, for those who are not familiar with the process on how we do analysis of mitigation potential, the main interest is having an idea of the transport demand. And this is a key challenge in a lot of African countries because of the transport data is not well documented, not well disaggregated. We had to do a lot of work as a project to be able to get an idea of issues around what's the emissions of vehicles per category. This was not there at the yet. Also getting an idea of just the travel characteristics in the country. So we have some research outputs highlighting what the difference is between the rural and urban areas, as well as also you need to have an idea of your average trip length, your average trip numbers in the urban areas in the country overall, broadly speaking. And so when you're doing an emission quantification of greenhouse gases, what you primarily need is having an idea of the transport demand. So data needs here include issues of travel, trip lengths, as I mentioned, trip numbers. Further to that, also the modal split and the load factors, and also something that is lacking in a lot of African countries as well is projections on how the vehicles by category are expected to progress over time. And this is a key issue, particularly if you want to also assess how you anticipate e-mobility uptake in the continent. It's a big challenge. So, I mean, currently, giving the Kenyan example, we were only able, in our analysis, I will show you in the next slide, we were only able to use very rough assumptions because the country at the moment has a rule that you can only import vehicles that are 8 years of age maximum. So to be able to do an assessment of how we foresee the mitigation potential of electric mobility in the country, the most crude assumption, the most easy assumptions to go for is looking at the transport or the electric mobility uptake in a developing country, in a developed country, and then using an assumption of an 8-year lag to be able to do this. But I would be also interested to get from the audience if there's anyone who's done this sort of work in a country within the continent, and what sort of assumptions you've used to be able to do a mitigation potential assessment, particularly for electric mobility, or even if it's not mitigation potential, how are you able to do this sort of projections on uptake of electric vehicles in your locality? And further to that, I mean, there are different categories of approaches as far as mitigation potentials are concerned. So there's an avoid option where trip is avoided completely, shifting from either the rail to road, and then improvement. Now, electric mobility, as far as a mitigation approach is concerned, it's more within the improve, because you're trying to improve the fuel efficiency of the vehicles as well, the fuel use and everything. So what's the situation in Kenya at the moment? I know Opibus will present a more practical sense in terms of what they are doing as a company, but broadly speaking, electric mobility is attractive to the country primarily based on two factors. Our energy mix is highly renewable. Sometimes it gets to up to 80, 90% of the energy mix being renewable, primarily because of geothermal as well as hydro. We're also producing excess energy up to 1 giga that can also be, create a market for e-mobility. And as I mentioned, this is the analysis that we had done, trying to see what is the mitigation potential and how does this contribute to the country's NDC target, and also the country's efforts to tap into available climate finance opportunities. And so you need to be able to justify what the numbers are, and this is what we've been supporting the country to be able to do. And we saw that Kenya, using the assumption that I mentioned initially, the mitigation potential for primarily electric mobility under the passenger car category is about 0.6 million tons CO2 equivalent. So this can be higher depending on what sort of policies are put in place. And as I also showed you at the very beginning, incentives are proven to work. So we're optimistic that if this is also taken up within the electric mobility subsector, this would also pick up quite aggressively. Further to that, why electric mobility as well, while not fuel cell or not synthetic fuels, PTX, Power2X, it's because we've looked around and it makes sense because of the overall efficiency of electric mobility. And we're not disputing the other technologies, but I think electric mobility has so far proven to be much more efficient compared to fuel cell, hydrogen, and other synthetic fuels. And so in Kenya, as I mentioned, the main political driver, this is should be my last slide. The main political driver has been its climate change target, as well as opportunities that come around it with regards to, as I've mentioned, climate finance opportunities to further create jobs and also tap into the value chain of electric mobility. There's also increased investment in research and development. Nairobi is proving to be a very attractive market, I will say, at the moment. I know Rwanda, Kigali has been in the media for quite a while with a lot of initiatives around e-mobility, but I will say that in the next few months, this year, next year, there are a lot of initiatives around e-mobility, both from the private side, also from the public. From the public side, the government of Kenya is planning to, with this plan to set up a bus rapid transport system, they're looking into possibilities of also integrating electric mobility in there. So, I'm very confident that in the next 2 years or so, Nairobi is going to be very attractive with regards to what is happening around electric mobility. Also, public interest is currently not super high, but it's growing with the awareness that is being created around electric mobility. And further, there's a lot of environmental, social, and economic benefits around the same. Within the region, there's quite a lot that is happening. Rwanda, as I mentioned, has really taken a lot of steps to market itself as a very attractive and potential market for e-mobility initiatives, and they just publicize the strategy for e-mobility with a lot of incentives mentioned. I've not been able to see the document, but I've had a lot of attractive incentives proposed in that. Kenya, through its National Climate Change Action Plan, has prioritized electric mobility as one of its key mitigation actions, as I mentioned. So from the government side, so far what we've seen is the interests are primarily on the climate change angle. But further to that, other ministries, like the Ministry of Industrialization, has interest also to increase the country's local assembly potential. So they're also interested in tapping into electric mobility because of this value chain expansion opportunities. Further to that, Uganda, Kira Motors Corporation, I'm aware they've been able to locally assemble two electric buses which are currently operating within the city. And so I would say there's a lot happening, and cities are also taking up a lot of initiatives to tackle air quality challenges mainly, and also just improve the quality of life, broadly speaking. Further resources, in case you're interested to know what's happening in the country and methodologies that we use as a project, these are the resources for that. I will stop there and look forward to the discussion part. Thank you very much.
Absolutely. Well, thank you very much for this amazing presentation, Herman. It's good to see things happening on the ground and fresh research insights. I was particularly taken by the modeling for the potential of mitigation that comes from e-mobility. And here I will take a moment to address the polls that we made so far. The first poll was about the age of the first electric vehicle that came. And here we had actually two answers. The very, very first one is in 1839, and this was designed by Ferdinand Porsche at the beginning of the drive to build the first car, in effect. But Siemens is the one that built the first fast electric vehicle, the one that can actually be called a car, in 1882. And the technology has been there ever since. And the second poll was about the contribution of road transportation to global greenhouse gas emissions. And actually, the answer here is, if I understand correctly, 45% of road passenger transport contribute, and this contributes 2/3 of all road transport emissions. I'm not sure I understood myself here, but in all cases, what I do know for a fact is that the greenhouse gas emissions in transportation are the fastest rising. And the problem is often seen as the one that is the most difficult to solve due to the mobile nature of the vehicles. And this actually takes me to Herman's presentation. I have a question for you. You mentioned the ASI framework, which we are all taught to be the basic framework to look at mitigation and fighting climate change. In my professional work, we have often worked adding an fourth dimension, which is the enabling dimension, the dimension to enable the development of policies, such as Rwanda commissioning them, the implementation of these policies. And perhaps what caught my attention the most is the exponential growth that was a result of changing incentives. We all know that Africa is dominated by informal transport, which is really fueled by the need of people to create employment before even providing a service. But maybe can you shed light to us about the Kenyan experience that caused the start of this exponential growth? What changed to cause this rift to start happening?
Yes. So yeah, as I had mentioned earlier, the main driver for these incentives around electric, I keep confusing. I'm quite excited about electric motorcycles. About typical internal combustion engine motorcycles was the interest to create jobs. At that point, between 2006 2007, there were high unemployment rates in the country, and then there was a lot of interest to go into just expanding opportunities to make public transport more affordable, more accessible. And one of the main opportunities for the government, without a lot of investment in the public transport sector, or just to support the informal public transport setup, was creation of incentives, and then allowing a lot of young people to bring in motorcycles at very low, affordable rates, mostly from India and China. This was the situation at that point. And so it picked up quite significantly, and it's growing up to now. There's quite a lot of motorcycle in Kenya, and as you can see, motor vehicles, your typical motor vehicles, are growing at about 100,000 a year. Motorcycles at about 170,000 a year. Currently, we have 1.7 million motor cycles, 1.9 million motor vehicles. But I would say in the next 2 years in Kenya, we'll see definitely the number of motorcycles becoming more than motor vehicles. And so with that in mind, the government has also taken away this incentive because it's growing at a much higher rate. So these incentives are no longer there. And so I will see like slow growth, but still very high because of the interest in the subsector. So as I mentioned, I mean, for me at the moment, the government of Kenya is also working on an electric mobility policy at the very initial stages. It hasn't kicked off yet, but we are optimistic that incentives will be included here for companies that are doing quite great work in the moment. Startups, a lot of startups in the country to take advantage of this, and then we will definitely see a spike of electric vehicles moving forward in the country. Yeah.
I think that this explosive growth of motorcycles, it sounds scary now. We're seeing more and more assignments. Our latest was in Uganda about the bodas, which are really growing exponentially there as well. We have a different project in Ghana where they want to stop the growth before it happens. So they're already implementing legislation to forbid the provision of taxi services using motorcycles. But to me, this exponential dynamics are what makes me so optimistic about the electrification of mobility in Africa. Because once we get the equation right, then you will start to be the explosion happening in the e-mobility space as opposed to the current petrol-dominated space. So I remain optimistic. Herman, I thank you very much for your presentation. In the interest of time, we'll proceed with the presentations. I'm aware of the questions coming in and we'll come back to them. But now we will give the floor to our lovely Charlène Kouassi. Charlène is the Director of African Mobilities Observatory. It is the OMA Moving On Lab. They work on providing new insights on mobility. That includes original research, building networks, and their aim is really to materialize projects that promote sustainable mobility. And on that case, Charlène, I leave the floor all to you, please.
I couldn't hear you.
Processus de décarbonisation du système de transport en Afrique fait face à plusieurs difficultés, mais je vais citer trois essentiellement. Alors, la première difficulté, à mon avis, c'est le manque de volonté politique affichée. La question de décarbonisation aujourd'hui ne semble toujours pas faire partie des priorités de nos États. La deuxième difficulté que je peux citer ici, c'est surtout le manque d'un cadre réglementaire adapté. Vous savez, les véhicules électriques et les véhicules à zéro émission constituent une nouvelle technologie que nous devons maîtriser. Donc, nous devons nous doter de réglementations, de cadres réglementaires fiables pour pouvoir donc permettre à nos États de s'approprier de cette technologie. Et la troisième difficulté, le manque de financement. Donc, nous avons besoin d'accompagner les États pour s'approprier donc non seulement la technologie électrique, mais aussi de financer les véhicules parce que jusqu'ici, les véhicules électriques restent très coûteux pour nos États.
Thank you, Mohammed, for this. We couldn't see, or on my side, I couldn't see the subtitles and the screen. I was hearing the voice of Issoufou Cissé, which is the Secretary General of the African Union for Public Transportation, which we interviewed a few weeks ago. And we are actually preparing this video on soot-free buses to show the challenges and what is actually done in the continent, or at least in some countries of the continent, in terms of decarbonation of public transport. So he raised 3 points on this video that I would like to explain. And it's actually aligned with my opinion of the sector at the moment. He raised the importance of the solid strategy to have and actually a vision that our states have to add and to implement through policies to actually decarbonize transport or electrify it, as it is the subject of this panel. And at the moment, it feels, and it's actually a general opinion that we have, that countries in Africa are not enough involved in this subject of decarbonizing transport at the moment. And he also raised the question of actually how can we, as we don't really know, I mean, our states are not aware of this new technology, how can they embrace it? We need maintenance, we need technology support, we need infrastructure also to support this kind of new technology. And we also need financing, build mechanism, create mechanisms to facilitate the acquisition of these vehicles. But before going into this subject, I would like to raise some question that wasn't mentioned in this small part of the question by Issoufou. Actually, I think that both local and global decarbonation strategy should be focused on the heart of the transport system. And at the moment, the heart, the essence of the system is the informal sector. And I feel that most of the strategies are not enough focused on decarbonizing them. We're more focused on buses, on mass transportation projects, mass transportation infrastructures, but we're not enough focused on transforming this informal sector. Minibuses, shared taxis, 2 or 3 wheelers are at the moment the most impactful. They actually ensure most of the demand for the population, and they're often left behind. And that's why it has been so difficult to regulate them and to organize them through the years. There are some countries that are actually focusing on creating urban mobility plan, like Rwanda, Senegal, Nigeria, which shows the importance of organizing transport at a larger scale and the most sustainable as possible. We have some laws to ban importation of old vehicle, of secondhand vehicles, like my fellow from GIZ mentioned earlier. And it's a good example that this strategy has to be implemented. But I feel that there is not enough supporting program and incentives to make new and low carbon vehicles accessible to the population, because at the time, electric vehicle or at least low emission vehicles are still expensive, too expensive for most of the populations in Africa. And that's why the processes of dialogues, consultation frameworks as well have to be carried out effectively to integrate all the actors of the ecosystem prior to the arrival of mass transportation systems. There are many innovations that can be supported by our governments. I'm talking about on-demand taxi solutions, car sharing solutions, shuttles, also for private transportation companies that we could focus on and that we should include in this type of strategy through incentives, for example, in terms of tax, in terms of fleet renewal, or even communication, basic communication to attract the population to adopt and to use this type of solution instead of polluting shared taxis, for example, or other type of transportation, which also impact positively the mobility in our African cities. So from what I analyzed, transport organizing authorities, when they exist, and it's another issue, not every African cities or countries have their own transport organizing authorities to build strategy, to analyze and to implement and monitor projects. When they exist, they are more focused on monitoring big infrastructure projects that will take 5, 10 to 15 years before being implemented, mostly from Western investments, than to resolve the urgent mobility issues that people face every day. So working with startups, companies, and the informal transport carriers does not necessarily need millions of dollars to be carried out. And they are to be considered as well. But supporting local solutions is actually more impactful. I mean, bring immediate impact as it develops local economy, creating jobs through companies and entrepreneurs. And it also favors dialogues and trust between the state and the population. So this is the part I wanted to mention on the importance of building local strategies with the inclusion of informal actors or even startups and companies. I could go further on the good and bad example that we have on public or private partnerships in terms of decarbonation, or also the issue of financing, or the importance of alliance and working in ecosystems. But I would like to leave the floor to the questions, maybe, for the public to give their opinion on the situation.
No, absolutely. Charlène, I really appreciate your intervention here, because you mentioned on so many subjects that are really my bread and butter as a work on a day-by-day basis. You touched upon the national governments who often pursue the decarbonization strategies or don't. Sometimes the pursuit is really happening from the ODAs that need to pursue this global goal. That's not a direct local concern. You mentioned the local PTOs, public transport authorities, that if they exist, have a propensity to prefer large-scale projects, simply because sometimes they're easier to make bankable than the informal sector, which is the heart of the issue. It transports the majority of the passengers, but how do you get there? And here there is actually a question. It is from Mr. Emmanuel, who works with the UITP. And he's asking, are you familiar with any recapitalization projects that are involved in changing public transport, informal public transport vehicles into cleaner ones, potentially even e-mobility ones? Do you think that this is a good approach? And here I will ask you, if you had $10 million to design a project within your network would you invest it in the vehicles? Would you invest it in an intermediary step? What would you use it for? What do you think is the best thing to use our limited resources in, Charlène?
I would definitely focus my investment on solutions that are local first, and that are really that actually brings impact on the ground. As I said, the informal transport, like minibuses, shared taxis, two-wheelers, etc., they are the essence of transportation. And at the moment, I feel like big transportation projects like light rail, metro, BRT, they are completely, they're actually great for a long-term angles, a long-term basis, but we also have to focus on immediate impact. And this immediate impact should be focusing on investing on our local entrepreneurs that are either in investing in connecting solutions, for example, to support the saving to educate financially the transport actors, and this education, this financing education could also make easier to them to buy new cars, less polluting cars, for example. But as they are informal, they are not registered, if we can say it this way, they can't really give access, they can't have access on banking solutions or loans or anything. So if we focus on these type of solutions, we could easily improve the transport system as a whole. And as for policies, I mean, the participants from the URTP mentioned it, there are actually some programs that are undergoing, or they are planned to actually renew the old vehicles, the informal or even the public transport as a whole, to renew them and to transform them, or to replace them, to make it more easy, to make it easier to replace them into new or even electric. But at the moment, these programs have not been ratified, or they are not implemented at the moment. And there always the issue of who is getting their fleet renewed. Mostly the people who have access to this program, this renewal program, is people who are registered, and it's not the majority of the actors, and they are actually they are not, as a whole, most of the drivers or the vehicle owner are not have not their own company of transport. So it's difficult to identify them and to provide them with new cars. So that's why I was talking about inclusion. If we have these consultation frameworks, these dialogues between non-state actors, institutions, ministries, and also informal sectors, we could easier address their issues and their demands and include them in this kind of program when they exist. I have an example of oh, sorry, maybe I'll take too much time, or do I have just 2 minutes to express?
Please.
Okay.
Yes, we welcome your concluding remarks, Charlene.
Okay. So there's a project that has been carried out a few years ago in a small city near Abidjan with solar-powered three-wheelers in the city. So the mayor had the idea to invest to support urban transport, as the actual vehicles were not answering the demand of the population. So it invested in 18 to 20 solar-powered three-wheelers. And it was a brilliant idea. But 1 year after, there were only 2 functioning, and the other ones were just out of service because of the lack of support of the national government, of the local authorities to provide services to actually maintain this vehicle in shape. And now the city is drawn with fuel-powered three-wheelers. So it's always the issue. This type of initiatives are good and can be expanded to a larger scale, but because of the lack of support, of government support and financing, it can't be sustainable.
And this is where we come to industry, because sometimes when the industry gets the equation right, as we have seen in the motorcycle industry, the fuel-based one, they can get to this explosive growth and they self-maintain. And it was mentioned before that we need new low-carbon vehicles. We need to make them accessible. And this takes us to our final panelists. Before we go, I think Ahmed will launch now our final poll.
Yes, Charlene talked about informality. Thank you, Charlene. And this is just a gauge of how much we think is the informal part of the public transportation in Africa. To answer this question, think of Joburg, Accra, Cairo, Nairobi. It applies to all of our major cities.
As the poet Efe mentioned in the introduction, the sprawls of Cairo and the contradictions of Lagos. What's the percentage? From here on, while we fill the poll, please allow me to introduce to you our final speaker. I introduce you Mr. Albin Wilson. He is the Chief Strategy and Marketing Officer at Obibus. His previous experience actually includes founding his own startup in Sweden. That was an e-mobility focused startup called Unity. And today he works with Obibus, which builds e-mobility vehicles in Kenya and designs them for Africa. I believe that Albas shared a video with us that we will start with. And after that, I will give you the floor to talk about the work that Obibus does.
It has been termed as the greatest environmental risk to human health. Yet sometimes you can't even see it. But air pollution is everywhere and threatens all of us.
It's actually costing the global economy what $5 trillion. It's actually the economy of all 54 African countries combined.
As air pollution levels remain dangerously high in many parts of the world, the report says that 9 out of 10 of pollution-related deaths occur in low and middle-income countries, mainly in Africa and Asia. Such disturbing statistics are what drove a group of young environmentally minded entrepreneurs with interest in green energy to set up an electric vehicle conversion company in Nairobi. This in a bid to reduce carbon emission in line with the UN Sustainable Development Goal number 13 of climate action.
We have 1.2 billion vehicles that is fossil fuel driven today, and we need to transition our transport sector. What would be the easiest way to convert a portion of those vehicles or to manufacture 1.2 billion new vehicles?
This design part of it, if you want to make a mount, probably you have to design, you have to come up with the dimensions you want. You have to know the type of material you want the mount to hold. So you will have to design the mount, you will have to do stress analysis for that mount to see whether the type of load applied on the material will be able to break the load. So there's the design and then there's the fabrication.
Founded in the year 2017, Obibus's initial focus has been on the conversion of off-road safari vehicles, but the company is now engaging a higher gear to bring change where the real mess is. The public transport, also known as the matatu sector.
Nairobi's air pollution is vivid in the city's congested streets, with personal cars, trucks, and motorcycles popularly known here as boda boda, jostling for space while belching clouds of black smoke into the air, literally shrouding the city to a smog.
This is what Obibus is seeking to solve.
So the matatu industry has a huge potential because they're driving on predetermined routes. They're often starting from point A, driving to point B, and then they're turning around and driving back to point A. What this creates is huge opportunities for electric mobility, meaning that you can place a fast charger in point A, a fast charger in point B, so when they stop to turn around, they actually charge their vehicle in a very short amount of time, meaning that they have enough power to drive back to point A and then do the same circuit and repeat that for a very long time. Actually, a lot of the customers we have, especially in terms of the off-road vehicles we're deploying, they are based in the off-grid. That means that they are relying on energy from the sun to actually charge their vehicles.
Vehicles with diesel engines are noisy and vibrate a lot, causing wear and tear. But with electric-powered engines, the noise and vibration produced is minimal, which means less wear and tear. This benefits both the driver and the owner of the vehicle.
Fantastic. Well, thank you very much for this great video, Alban. The floor is yours.
Absolutely. So my name is Alban and I come from OPBus. As the video states, we focus on really high impact areas. We started the company focusing on safari vehicles to really build up local competence and local technology and local designs and architectures of our electric mobility systems here in Kenya, and to test those in an environment that is really taxing and really rugged for the systems. Now we've moved on to converting public transport systems. As we saw in the video, we focus on these areas because infrastructure is a lot easier to deploy and doesn't require a pre-existing infrastructure system. And why we've chosen Nairobi is really because of a lot of the things we heard from the I said earlier, is that the energy mix makes sense here. We believe that converting vehicles is something that's also really makes sense because it lowers the initial cost of implementing electric mobility, since we can use existing chassis or skeletons of vehicles, and also a lot of the vehicles here are old already when they are imported into the region. And as our vision really is focused on maximizing impact and sustainable impact, we've also transitioned into further electric vehicles such as electric motorcycles that we actually design from scratch and build completely here locally. And this, we believe, is that this makes sense because the products have to be designed and manufactured in the region that they will be used in. So that's a little bit of the things we do at OPBus, and we believe that you have to offer the whole ecosystem. So focusing on obviously creating the electric vehicles here, designing them here, also deploying solar and charging infrastructure for them so that we can actually build the full ecosystem of electric mobility that is tailored for the market. And we do so by driving, and we believe this is important because building the technology enables you to actually become a lot more cost efficient and also create a lot more synergies. And as we said with the solar cycles earlier, I mean, we want to offer servicing, spare parts, maintenance, and all the other obstacles that come with implementing a new technology. And that means we want to build a long-term kind of implementation of electric mobility. And we're here locally, and we're not importing vehicles to meet the market demand. And that's why we think that this actually will be a leapfrog event, because we think just automotive production here locally can really make a booming market, especially in the motorcycle sector, and transforming the public transport sector into electric. Yeah, that's a little bit of what we believe at OPBus. And then we also focus on changing cultures of companies. We employ 40% women, even though we're a technology company, which is rare all over the world. And we really focus on, trying to implement these forward-thinking technologies.
Fantastic. Alban, I thank you for this brief overview of OPBUS, and I'm actually really interested in some of your opinions engaging with different stakeholders. We have a question from Ahmed El-Gindi, and it is about what do you think is the real driver for governments to push e-mobility in Africa? Because when I look at it, there's obviously the greenhouse gas emissions side, there is the climate change side, and the need to fulfill the commitments. But on the other side, I think you also mentioned that OPBUS is manufacturing locally, and we have seen in the Chinese example this very active industrial policy to go all in on electric buses until they became leaders in electric buses in a way that they never were in normal fuel-based buses. Is this industrial policy kind of thing also an issue that you're encountering in Nairobi and in the wider continent? What do you think is the real driver?
Well, we think it's really important to work with governments and local policymakers to enable, local manufacturing and job creation. This is because, we need to be a part of the ecosystem, not only in the transport sector, but also in the industry sector. And as we've seen with China, our belief is that the GDP growth and the growth of this region will be enormous in the coming years. And I think people underestimate how quickly this transition to electric mobility will happen, and also local manufacturing and engineering capacity. I think it's a really exciting time, and we're really working closely with policy and governments to enable this transition and make it as fast as possible, and potentially even move on to a global scale headquartering here in Kenya or Africa for that matter.
I think you really touched on an amazing point about the GDP growth. We often forget that Africa is not just a big market. It seems small in current monetary terms, but it is actually geographically huge. A lot of countries and massive growth rates and massive population growth rates. It's a big and growing market. But this also mentions to me, what about the incumbents? Do you see a risk, and this question comes from Juliette Thies, do you see a risk that the current transport unions would want to block these new technologies? What about the vested interests? We know, for instance, in South Africa that a lot of these unions own traditional petrol stations and have these deals between operators and fuel providers. How do you manage that?
Well, we work closely with fuel providers, and if you see global fuel providers such as Shell and BP and these larger corporations, they are starting to realize that the business model for being an energy provider rather than a fuel provider is starting to make a lot more sense. And it's also a lot easier to implement the business model of actually charging and taking reoccurring revenue for charging if you implement it with renewables. So I think we'll see a radical shift in the energy providers and their kind of motives to implement electric mobility. As Thomas said earlier, energy access with decentralized energy grids is really enabled by electric vehicles. And that's a project that we've been working with Siemens Stiftung in Western Kenya to implement mobility with microgrids. Which enables, a faster implementation of renewables and a faster implementation of renewable transportation. So I think the shift is embedded. It will happen. The question is if some of the oil companies will go down fighting or will join the kind of transition. But only time will tell, and we're open to partnerships with, energy providers. And if that's oil companies transitioning into renewables, that's great, wonderful. They already have the land, they already have the fueling stations. I mean, we just have to make a shift to a safer kind of technology, which is charging and swapping, if that matter, will happen for electric motorcycles.
Well, thank you very much, Alban. I agree with you on that. We've also seen how in Kenya, power grid operators are actually some of the biggest push factors towards electrification. They want the continuous demand for their product in the future, electricity, clean, hopefully. We're coming to the end of our panel. I would like to invite all of the panelists to return their video if possible and to join us on the virtual stage. And I think that to recap like the highlights from what we heard talking today, we started with an overview of what is the best things that are happening worldwide, the shifts that are necessary to happen towards the creation of the roaming and mobility platforms, the potential for leapfrogging, and we heard about the exponential growth dynamics that really manage these sectors, the transportation sectors, the informal ones in particular. We talked about the technology trajectories. All of us are familiar with the one in battery prices that is going in one direction and probably is the single biggest driver for us having this discussion in the first place. We talked about the different sectors, the informal sector, which is really the beneficiary, but also the target that we want to work with, but also the public sector, the national governments and the local PTOs that are the drivers behind this. The role that DFIs and ODAs plays, the financing that comes in, has been debated because ultimately it is about these partnerships that make us be able to look optimistically in the future. Perhaps I will pose one final question for all of our attendees. And I thank Cynthia for really giving us the inspiration for that. And it is like maybe in one or two sentences each, what do you think is the first thing in the near future that will happen in terms of a project or an investment? Allow me to rephrase. Who do you think will be the next investor and how much will they put in electrification of e-buses in Africa? Will they be national governments? Will they be private companies? Will the informal sector bring in its levers of capital? Will the informal sector access bank-based financing? Will we have to rely on DFIs in a sort of transition phase? And do you think that these investments will be low, medium, or high? Let's maybe take turns on this. Thomas, would you like to maybe go first with your prediction for the potential of electrification of minibuses in Africa?
Yes. So I think from today's point of view, I think we have to, my experience or recommendations really, we need this combined approach from the government approach really to support this, also with subsidiaries in the e-bus field, because the infrastructure is a huge investment, and also for the buses. I know it's more expensive still than normal buses, but on the other hand, I see also the potential for the private investment, and I think there is not only from the who's the player in the e-bus or in the public transport, it's the transport companies, but I think also the power utilities will have an interest, also the mobility branch, the industries. So I think it will be a combination about the private investment, but also for the governmental support. I think makes both sense in my opinion. It's a hybrid solution here. It's my approach, what I would see in the future here in Africa.
So we need some subsidies to support this transition, but it will be co-led by the private and the governments at the same time. Thank you, Thomas. Perhaps Herman, you would guess to give us a little bit about your outlook, maybe focused on the East African space?
Yeah, looking at Nairobi and the way it's transforming over time, the current e-mobility space is dominated by startups. So private investment, DFI financed, and some of them investor driven. So government involvement up until now has been very minimal. as I said. So it's more private driven, very youthful market in Nairobi. Innovation is really at the center of interests of a lot of young people in this continent, and Nairobi in particular. So for me, from my perspective, looking at how the market is growing, we currently have about 15 to 20 startups working on electric mobility, I would say. Those I've actually interacted with. And so this is a space that is largely driven by startups. And I see this progressing over time as it is, with motorcycles taking center stage, and progressively hoping Albin and team will be successful with the pilot on the public transport space. So if that picks up, I think it's going to transform Nairobi significantly over time. Yeah, that's my outlook for now.
Fantastic. Well, thank you, Herman. I think we have a big push here to be creative, to be innovative, to venture capital, startups, and the private money that flows behind it. This is a big vote of confidence. Thank you, Herman. Maybe Charlene, what do you think?
Actually, how we see the trends going at the moment, and I will talk about the West African side, because we see that energy resources has not been exploited the same way. In the East African side, I feel, and the South as well, I feel like electrification seems to be one of the best way to drive our transport systems. But in the West, we're more focusing on the energy mix between natural gas, biofuels, and also electrification. Because when most of our countries have not the capacity to power their own population needs, social basic needs, I can't imagine an entire transport system powered by electricity. It seems to me, it seems impossible and not sustainable. But an energy mix is feasible. And I feel like most investment on buses, for example, is coming from the West, like the Western companies like Scania, Keolis, a lot of big suppliers from the West. But I really hope that local manufacturers like OP Bus, for example, here, or Kira Motors also in Uganda, or others like them, can have the initiative and the courage to approach the rest of the African cities to also provide their services in the continent.
Thank you, Charlene. So the key word seems to me here, the need for more local manufacturing.
Exactly.
This echoes what we heard from Herman and from Thomas about the private sector and startups. And I think that all roads seem to be leading to OPBus. The last question is to you, Albin, and you have skin in the game. Should I invest? Are you open for investments? How are you growing? How are things coming along?
I mean, we've been revenue driven from day one, and now we're really, we've finished, testing our product and validating them. So we're really scaling up now and taking in larger investments. So it's an exciting time for growth, and I think it's really great. It's super exciting. So absolutely.
I think that excitement is why we all came here. And we stayed 10 minutes extra. I think it's time for us to close this panel, a successful one, I might add. I'm very grateful to have been able to share this experience with you today. And I would like to extend a big thank you to the organizers at Drive Africa, to the team behind the scenes, to Ahmed for co-hosting and bringing us all together. I also would like to thank you, the panelists, for taking the time before today and during today, for being so generous with your knowledge and expertise. And finally, for our attendees for sticking with us. Small note, most attendees who came at the beginning stayed in, and I have never seen this in a webinar. So I would call this one a successful one. A big thank you. And I leave the floor to Ahmed to close us also with the answer for the final poll.
I put the polls down with the answers on the chat. Everyone was correct. The average of informal trips in Africa is 70% of all the trips, and that applies to most cities, Joburg included, in Kigali and Nairobi. It goes up to like 100% in some cities, obviously. I just want to thank everyone who was with us in the audience today, and to the panelists for their great inputs, and to Higazi and to Rise Up for giving us this opportunity to share our ideas and discuss this important matter with everyone. Thank you all, and thank you for the organizers.